You're listening to Cornerstone West Los Angeles.
If you missed last week, or 2 weeks ago now, I hurt myself. Originally, I was in a cast because I tore my Achilles tendon. And then last week, I had surgery so they could, put it back together again. And so now, just stretch. Everybody stretch. Stay limber. And don't jump up and down. But in the time, the last couple of weeks, along that same timeline, we started a new series. We started a book of the Bible called Ecclesiastes, and what we've seen thus far is basically, it's asking us a basic but a deep and a pretty profound question, which is, what parts of reality are you trying your best to ignore? As you look around at the world, in the midst of all your daily activity and the flurry of things that you do, what parts of reality are you trying to forget about, trying to cover up? One of the very first sermon illustrations I ever used was a story about a guy that owned a snake. I don't know much about snakes. You put them in terrariums, which is like an aquarium, but with no water. And apparently you decorate them so you have wood chips on the ground to simulate wherever they would be in with wood chips, and there's fake trees and a rock or something. And you feed a lot of these snakes mice. They call them feeder mice. You go to the store, you buy a mouse, you drop it in, and the snake eats the mouse. Well, this guy had a snake, and he buys the mouse, and he puts the mouse in the terrarium, but the snake is asleep. And so the mouse kind of goes in and kind of looks around and realizes there's a significant problem, and tries to figure out what to do, and lands on this really interesting solution, which is apparently the mouse just sort of turned his back to the snake and started just almost running to kick up all the wood chips on the ground. And eventually, the glass was exposed. There's no wood chips left because they're all completely covering the snake. And once he can't see the snake, he kind of goes cool, problem solved, and starts checking out the fake tree and looking at the rock and things are okay. Now, this is not a good strategy. And there's a way that you almost feel kind of a pity, for this little mouse, because there's this sense of accomplishment, but nothing has really been solved. For all of that activity, nothing really changed, and at some point, the snake's going to shake off the wood chips and assert itself again. Now, the book of Ecclesiastes is basically coming at us saying, you live more of your life throwing wood chips over reality than you realize. And at some point, reality will assert itself and shake off all of the hiding that you've done. And the author, who calls himself the preacher, has this unique sort of strategy to show us this. What he does is basically take us by the scruff of our neck, dust off some wood chips, and say, look, you have to see reality as it is. You need to look at the world with open eyes. Otherwise, you're never going to find any joy. All your joy will be fake. It'll be wood chip joy, not real joy. And that's what he says, what we saw a couple weeks ago in the introduction of the book. Life is vanity, he says. And we talked about how the base word of that is vapor. It's like smoke. You can't predict it, you can't shape it. If you try and grab it, you can't grab it. If you try and move it, it sort of curls around your hands. It's there in 1 minute, it's gone the next. Life it's a vapor. And he says, now you get so active, you have all this activity in your life, and you have this activity because you tend to think that you can have some control over the vapor. You do all this stuff to try and affect the vapor of life and make it what you want it to be. But he says, this is verse 3 of the book, he says, what gain do you end up getting from all of that activity? Do you ever actually control the vapor? Do you have anything to show for all the activity that you do in your life? And he points you to nature, the sun, the wind, the waves, and the ocean and the streams. And he says, look, does the sun, after going around and around for millennia, have something in the bank? Does it make money on this venture? Does it have anything to show for going around and around? He says, no. And he says, well, humans aren't any bigger than the universe. If you think reality is something you can manage, something you can manipulate, to make a sort of profit on, then all you've done is just buried reality under some wood chips. And one day, it's going to shake the wood chips off, and you're going to realize that none of the activity really worked. Now, the nice thing is that reality here isn't a snake waiting to eat you, but the reality under the wood chips, what he's trying to get across, is that you're not God. You're human. You aren't in control. You are finite. You can't make the vapor do what you want it to do. And he wants to show us that because he wants to get across this idea. Joy is actually found in being human, not in being more than human, or better than human, or bigger than human. But the only way to get there is to expose all the different ways we try and transcend our humanity and be big and be godlike so that he can drive us back to say, no. It's by looking at the reality of your humanness. That's where you're actually going to find joy. That's the thing. And so because we're very hard to convince on this, and for those of us who sort of nod along and say, oh yes, of course, he's aiming at us too, he ends up taking us on this sort of tour around the various stops that the big ones that people use to try and get some gain, to try and get some control, to try and make the smoke do what you want. He's basically going from wood chips to wood chips and seeing if there's any way to build like lasting control or significance on the earth. And today we come to his first stop. And so we're going to read Ecclesiastes 1, verses 12 through 18. It's on, I think, page 553 of your pew Bibles. I can't carry things with crutches, so I'm not entirely sure. But, it's also on the screen. Here's what it says, starting in verse 12. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. And I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who are over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. This is the word of the Lord. Now, the preacher is trying to be organized here, and so I'll be organized too. I've got 4 P's for you, which is at least an extra 10 points in preaching class, though you probably don't care about that. You get 4, man, it's pretty good. We're going to talk about the project, the promise, the problem, and the provision. The project we're all on, the promise of human wisdom, the problem with human wisdom, and the provision of true wisdom. This is the plan, okay? And this is sort of what he's going to take us through. So first, the project we're all on. He starts the whole thing. I've been king, and I applied my heart to seek and search out all that's done under heaven. He's looking for something. Seek, he's searching. And he's applying his heart, which means that this isn't like a thought exercise or, sort of an internal kind of theoretical project. He genuinely cares about this project that he's going to be on. It means something to him, and we're going to find it means something to us. Now, okay, so what's going on? What is he trying to do? There's an old playwright around the turn of the 20th century, Henrik Ibsen. Ibsen wrote a ton of plays, and one of them was called The Wild Duck. And it was this play about this family that had a ton of skeletons in their closet, and they coped with it by essentially pretending that they had a lot of good things going on, a lot of irons in the fire, a lot of things that were going to change. And this guy comes in from the outside and exposes the skeletons, and the whole thing falls apart. It fractures. And there's a line at the very end of the play, near the very end, where an outside observer says this. He says, if you take away the life lie from the average person, you take away their happiness. And what he means is, the idea behind the whole play is that everyone has a sort of life lie, a way of escaping from reality, sort of a preferred set of wood chips that you use to cover up the things you don't want to see. And in the play, everyone has different ones. Some of them are tied to family, and some of them were tied to like a business invention that was going to really change things, to making a difference in the world, even to like ideals about truth and honesty and these sorts of things. All these end up being life lies. And when they fall apart, the happiness goes away. Your happiness is tied to the lie. This is one of the things the play is trying to show, is that we're all kind of dishonest in some ways. We all hide from reality. Now, what's really interesting is how I've seen people take up this idea and use it. So, for example, this woman, Erin Falconer, wrote, I think this year, wrote a productivity book, kind of a lifestyle management, personal improvement kind of a book. And she wrote an article that sounds so much like Ecclesiastes until it doesn't. So here's what she says. Reality, this is her opener. Reality, when looked at truthfully, is quite depressing. We're all doomed to tumultuous lives filled with toil and frustration. Most of us won't live up to our potential. Most of our hopes and dreams will never be realized. Just when you think a problem is solved, an uglier one replaces it. The cycle of desperation continues as our faculties decline. We lose our strength and beauty. We become shells of our former selves and eventually die. So this is it's a lead line. And then, you know what she says? She says, I was having a hard time with this, and then I read this play called The Wild Duck by a guy named Ibsen. Here's what she says. Fortunately, now thinking about that nasty truth can be averted with a well-crafted life lie. How? Luckily, it's easy. If you are a relatively happy person, my guess is you already have one. A life lie is a story we tell ourselves, a story we actually believe about our lives that lets us ignore reality and focus on a glorious future. And she goes on to talk about hers. I believe that if I keep working hard, my writing will become incredibly popular and I'll make a lot of money. Once I have the money problem taken care of, I'll be free to indulge my passions for the rest of my life. I don't just tell myself this. Every day, I work hard, I come home, boot up my computer, and start working on the next article or website. Sometimes, she says, I lose my life lie. Reality sets in, and it's incredibly depressing. I feel my smallness, weakness, and the lack of control I have over my life. It's almost unbearable. Fortunately, I always come up with a new life lie. By crafting a beautiful life lie, you can fill your life with hope and purpose. You can avert the paralyzing uncertainty of reality. You can live a life of ignorant bliss. Now, it's interesting because there's a humor there at some point. So basically, like, you're just out and out saying everything, you're just making stuff up. But I genuinely appreciate the honesty. Like, she has an awareness that all the work she's putting in, all her toil and activity throughout the day is in service to a life lie. I'm curious how many of us have that same level of honesty. When you think about all the activity that you do day in and day out, like, are you aware of the life lies you're tempted to pursue? Are you aware of the things you're telling yourself? At least she's aware. Are we aware? And there's this sense in all of us that the things we do, a lot of our activity is a kind of fidgeting. It's wood chips that cover over a reality we don't really want to face up to. There's this intuitive sense we have that a lot of the things we do boil down to a life lie. And the project for the preacher, having this intuitive sense, is this. Can I find something out there that isn't a lie? I have a lot of resources at my disposal. I'm a king. I mean, he had basically an unlimited amount of resources at his disposal. Can I find something with all those resources that doesn't end up being a lie but ends up being true? They can get me the control I want. They can get me the right outcome that I want for the rest of my life. Remember that question? What gain is there under the sun? His project is, can I find anything that can get me some gain? And he'll go through various options and test them. Today we look at wisdom. He'll go through pleasure. He'll go through the idea of essentially hard work. You know, maybe it's not thinking or feeling, it's like doing and applying yourself. That's going to get me gain. But we have to understand that's not just his project. It's not just this thing this weird guy did one time. This is our project too. We're constantly doing this. The project we're all on, in and out of the days of our life, is to see if we can build meaning and significance and some sense of lasting control by shaping that vapor of our lives. Is there something out there that can give us access to some kind of control, some kind of power, some kind of malleability to my life, where I can predict the outcomes and change them if I want to? And so this is why you're always sort of tweaking things in your life to look for a little more satisfaction, maybe a little more efficiency, a little more productivity, a little more health, a little more knowledge. You're always tweaking certain things. And you're basically saying, something along these lines, sure, I know a lot of this is wood chips, but this over here has some real promise to actually change things. And that's why we bounce from life lie to life lie. Like, once you realize the first one's a life lie, why do you pick a new one? Because you think that one might actually work. And so every time you think, if this was different, things would be better. If I could adjust this, then my life would be what I need it to be. You're embarking on your project. You're experimenting to see how you can make this work. And the preacher's saying, I'm doing that too, but I have unlimited resources. You wish you could do some things. I actually can. So let's see what happens. Now, without skipping a beat, he gives you his conclusion. It's sort of like a spoiler alert. Unless you get your hopes up, this is not going to work. And he says, this is at the end of verse 13 and 14. It's an unhappy business God's given the children of man. All is vanity and striving after the wind. He's essentially saying, look, when this whole project is said and done, what you're going to realize is that God has put us in a position by making us human beings that we're not able to figure everything out. We're not able to have that kind of control. We're not able to get that kind of gain. We're not bigger than the universe, and we're not bigger than him. And because of the piece of us that longs for meaning and significance, when we're cut off from that, what we're going to tend to do is go on our own project to amass it, to find a way to do it ourselves. And when you do that, the whole thing is going to be an unhappy business. Frustrating, vexing, never reaching the satisfaction you're trying to grab. That's why he calls it striving after the wind. My kids love bubbles. I think I know why adults don't usually love bubbles. Because they pop. My kids they're still young enough to where they'll chase bubbles. They'll talk to me about, I'm going to catch a bubble. And I'm always like, well, I keep it to myself, but no, you're not. No one's ever caught a bubble. You've popped bubbles. And that's the thing about, you can't put them in a bag. You can't collect bubbles. The minute you get to one, your very touching of it makes it pop. It goes away. Now you got to get a new one. It's striving after the wind. Every time you reach for something, maybe this is the thing that's going to get me some gain. Pop. Okay, got to get a new one. Life fly to life fly, wood chips to wood chips. This is the project we're on. Maybe one of them won't pop. Maybe one of them will actually get rid of the snake. And so now this isn't his final destination. This isn't like his whole point. His point isn't, too bad you're human, can't get what you want, so be prepared to be unhappy. No, what he's trying to do is undercut this approach to life that we have. He's trying to show us that our projects don't work. And the path to joy doesn't come by finally finding the thing that gives you control. The path to joy comes by understanding that life is a vapor for you, but there's a good God over it. And so you can enjoy the things in the vapor of your life as they come. This is the idea he's going for. And to get there, he's got to drill down on these different stops. And so the first stop is, what about wisdom? What about knowledge? What about learning? Can we use that to get some sort of gain? Is that a bubble we can catch and it won't pop? So the promise of human wisdom, point 2. Now, this is the first approach. It sounds like this. If I know enough, then I can have some control over my life. You see it in verse 13. I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. He is basically saying, as a human being, on my own, I want to know everything about everything. All that's done under heaven. J.I. Packer had a good illustration about this. He's British, and he says there's a railway station in York, in England. He said it's just kind of crazy. It's, railway stations are kind of nuts. Like you're on the platform, and the trains come in, and they go out, and you don't know really why one of them comes before the other. You're not in charge of the schedule. You don't know how to make one go faster or slower. There's smoke and noise and people yelling and coming in and coming out. It's just, you don't have any sense of what's going on. He says, but over on the side, up a bunch of stairs, there's this thing called the signal box. And in the signal box, you actually have a map of all the different tracks at York Station for 5 miles in each direction. And they're like little dots that glow, so kind of like glowworms, like they kind of show you where all the trains are. And that, because you can see everything and how it all fits together, that's where they have these little control things that allow you to sort of back some up, switch tracks on others. You're in the signal box. For us today, it's more along the lines of like an airport. That's what we're more familiar with. You're in one terminal. You can't see all the different tarmacs, all the different terminals, all the things going on in the sky. But what do they have? They have a control tower where they have all that stuff right at your fingertips. You see how everything fits together, and you got that microphone that talks to all the pilots. Hey, you don't come in yet. I need you to circle. You come in now. Because you know everything and see how everything fits together from like a bird's eye view, you now have control over the outcomes. You have the ability to make a difference. This is the idea. That's what he's saying. If I know everything, maybe that bubble won't pop. Maybe if I get into the control tower, maybe that's how I can control my life. And that's the promise of human wisdom. It's always been this way. If I know the right stuff, I can shape the outcome of my life. And today we talk about it, differently. There's a lot of ways we could do this, but you notice how we're fixated on studies today? There are like studies, we did it. They did a 10-year study. You know what it proved? Being in debt is not great. Okay, well, yeah, we're studying everything now, and there's a sense of what studies count, what ones don't, what counts as expertise and what doesn't. We're fixated a lot these days on technique, like the idea of if I learn the right techniques, I can then control my life. I can control how the dominoes are going to fall, and so that's why you have all these websites devoted to life hacking. as though life sort of has a code that you can get in there and adjust. If you know the code, you can adjust it to figure out how you want it to turn out. And so in today's world, in places like LA, it's gotten pretty extreme. The promise that if we just know more, it's going to work out. Because now, and I think for all of us in the room, it's just kind of in the water. It's like an accepted fact that like 300-400 years ago, we started understanding how to what's going on in the world and how to make it work for us. We know about atoms and then what's in the atoms. We kind of started learning how to make all this work for us with the scientific method and things like this. And we're just going to keep going. The train's not going to stop. We're going to learn more, and each next stop on the track, we're going to have more control over our lives. And some of us are kind of like, I hope I don't die before they get to the next big stop, where it's like, oh, then that's going to change this thing, and that's going to change this thing. We have this idea, it's just going to keep going. To the degree that, someone like Alan Harrington, who's a pretty famous scholar, this is what he said: death now is an imposition on the human race and no longer acceptable. We've long since gone beyond the moon, touched down on Mars, harnessed nuclear energy, artificially reproduced DNA. Why should death be considered beyond conquest? You see the logic. It's very clear. If we know more, we get more control. And if you just hang out long enough, you'll end up being able to enjoy that control as our knowledge increases. And okay, that's a little theoretical. It grounds down into our daily lives. I hurt my foot. Do you have any idea how much information I have on Achilles tendon tears right now? What did I do? The minute I got back and knew what it was, I Googled to my heart's content. You know how many pills I'm taking right now? Like supplements and stuff? And you know what? I'm almost positive they don't work. Because I read the studies, and I can't do that because then the placebo effect won't work if I know they don't work. So I gotta believe in them. And maybe they do. But what's fascinating is, like, at the end of the day, it's going to heal the way it heals. My ability to control 0.2% of that healing process is really not going to do that much. But boy, do I think that the more I know, the more I can control the outcome for this. If I just knew the right technique, then I would be in control of my own destiny. See, talk about conquering death, talk about conquering an Achilles tendon tear, talk about conquering your schedule. At some level, we all have this sense, this promise, that the more knowledge I get, the more learning I do, the more in control I can be. If I learn enough, it gets me into the control tower. I can start moving levers in my life. We're on the project. That's the promise of human wisdom. It makes that promise to us. Just keep going, and you'll be able to be in control. Now, point 3, there's a problem with that. And the preacher's, he's already told us this isn't going to work out. He didn't leave us in suspense. But what's the issue? Why doesn't it work out? Well, he starts in verse 15. It's sort of a proverb. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. These are sort of things you're supposed to look at and kind of think about as you look at them. And the idea is basically this. Imagine a steel beam. Part of it is straight, part of it's sort of crooked. It's like, if you just take your hands as a human being, you're not going to be able to do much about that. You can't take the straight part and make it crooked. Can't take the crooked part and make it straight. In the same way, we don't have that kind of control. Like, when you look at the world as it really is, not as you wish it was, you realize we can't change things with that kind of finality. And then, what is lacking can't be counted. It's almost like the idea that you're trying to put together this puzzle with all your wisdom, but you're missing pieces. Or like you're trying to get a Rubik's Cube done, but a lot of the colors have fallen off. Like you don't have what you need to get this done. In other words, life isn't something that can be hacked. No matter how much technique we learn, no matter how advanced we get, we don't have access to the control tower. We will never know the universe like omnisciently the way we want to, seeing all the things in all the directions. Sandro Galea, he was a medical doctor for a long time, still is, but now he's the dean of Boston University's public health department. Written a ton of stuff, very important in this field. He wrote an article a couple of years ago, and he referenced this TED Talk that he had seen. It was called How to Live to Be 100 Plus. And of course, it's got like 3 bajillion views or whatever. Everyone's seen this. And the point of the talk was that we need to devote ourselves to find an optimal formula for longevity. In other words, we need to find the perfect algorithm for everyone to live as long as they can and as healthy as they can. And he says, look, I'm a doctor. I love health. Like, I'm a big fan of everyone being healthy. So, like, on the train. But then he says this. He says, look, the idea that lifestyle modification can lead to a better, more illness-free existence, it's very seductive. Because it looks like it offers a way of taking actual ownership of your health. It implies that with the right knowledge, you can predict which maladies you have the greatest chance of facing. And that makes preventing those maladies look really simple. If you see the train coming, if you want to preserve life and limb, just step off the tracks. Then he says, unfortunately, this is not how things actually work. And he goes on to say, it's fascinating. He goes on to say that because we are so fixated with getting into the control tower when it comes to our health, that we are actually impeding our ability to heal diseases in whole populations. He says, we're so focused on the small, relatively ineffective individual modifications you can make that we don't look at how whole populations are affected by things and deal with that at that level. So we're actually we're not decreasing the level of disease as much as we could because we're so focused on ourselves and our own personal ability to control outcomes. That is crazy. And he's got no dog in the fight. He just wants to help people not get diseases. It reminds me of a friend of mine, David, who's a medical student at Stanford, and he was down here and he was talking with a neuroscientist professor at UCLA, so that's a fun conversation, and Dr. Schwartz. And so David was referencing a very important article, a study that came out, I want to say 5 years ago, maybe more. It was huge, made a lot of waves, because the study was about how most studies are wrong. So like everyone's citing this thing, like what in the world? Like what do we do? And so, and David said, if I showed this study about how most studies are wrong to a bunch of doctors, they would go, yeah, that sounds about right. Those numbers sound right. And then Schwartz, the neuroscientist, chimes in, he goes, but don't tell the patients. Now what's he saying? We talk about how doctors like to have like a God complex. I don't know that many doctors that have a God complex. But I know a lot of patients, including myself, that wish doctors were gods. See, we think that if they're in the control tower, if they have access to some special knowledge, then we can use it to get in our own control tower. And so it becomes very important for us to not have to question any of this stuff, to look at them like priests who can sort of mediate healing across our lives and give us the answers we need to control things. It's fascinating. And no matter where you turn, it's like this. I mean, I got hurt, so I'm doing medical stuff. But, it's everywhere. This is the trauma of like graduate school or meeting your heroes. You look at these certain people, there's a sense that there are people out there who have done enough reading and enough study and enough thinking that they have genuine answers. They kind of got into the tower. But then you meet them, or you go to graduate school and they're your advisors, and you walk around and you realize how much politics is involved in universities and how much politics is involved in book publishing, and how it's a lot easier to make money on things that are simple and not things that are complex, and how the news can kind of distort the different things that come out, and basically, how frankly, some of them can be childish and irrational, and you kind of go, how did they get to be called experts? At the end of the day, no matter where you turn, you realize it's just humans all the way up. No one near the top has access to some secret book of how the universe works. We're all dealt the same deck of cards. We have access to the same world. And that's not to say they don't know more than you. They totally do. Experts know a ton more than you. And you should listen to your doctors. And you should feel free to take some vitamins. None of this is bad. But the issue is none of those people, no matter how high you go, are above the sun. None of them got any higher than you. None of them got into the control tower. But boy, do we wish they did. The more you try and get into the control tower, the further away you realize you are. And that's what that's the position he finds himself in. He goes on, he says, this is verse 16, I acquired great wisdom. I surpassed all the people before me. And then he says, I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. Which means either I really wanted to make sure I knew the perfect difference between wisdom and foolishness, so I could only do wisdom. Or it means I kind of looked at wisdom like the right way to do things, the way that tradition and culture and the experts all say we should do. And I also looked at the other way of doing things, the punk rock way. Sort of who cares what those elites say? I don't care about the experts. I'm going to do it my own way. And I tried them both. Basically, I tried every version of what people think smart is. And I came to the same conclusion. It's striving after the wind. It's chasing bubbles. And at the very end, in verse 18, he says, for in much wisdom is much vexation. and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Remember when you were a kid and there were those times, there's like a certain age range where you would look at the adults and you'd go like, I want to know what you're talking about. Like, and sometimes you'd pretend you did, but you didn't. You know, like, I want to know what's going on. And now that you're an adult, you kind of go, I wish I didn't know this stuff. I wish I was a kid. I wish I didn't know how the world really works a lot of the time. That'd be nice. And much wisdom is much vexation. The more you look to get into the control tower, the further away you realize you are, the more frustrated you get. Or T.S. Eliot, all our knowledge brings us nearer to our ignorance. And what's funny is he's not even done. He actually comes back to this in chapter 2, and it gets darker. He says, this is chapter 2, verse 12. I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. And then he talks about some things in context about the king and things that are already been done. And he said, I saw there was more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there's more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, and the fool walks in darkness. In other words, listen to your doctor. It's good to learn things. Don't be foolish. It genuinely helps you in your life. But then he says, yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart, this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life. It's all vanity and is striving after the wind. Wisdom's good, but it can't get you into the control tower. It can't get you past death. It can't get you to be in control of the outcomes of your life. It can't get you above the sun. In other words, human wisdom is a life lie. It just sounds better. Like there's this way that because of that, learning, education, information gathering, sort of self-improvement, it's like this drug that we've all just decided we're going to be okay with. Like this constant preoccupation with self-betterment and reading the right things and having read the right articles and knowing the right things to say. Like all of this stuff, like if someone said, I get real anxious and I get worried in my life, I'm not really in control of my life, so you know what I do? I cope with it by drinking a lot. Like we'd go, that's a horrible idea. Like it's A, it doesn't change anything, and B, it just doesn't, it's bad for you. But why, when someone says, I get really kind of anxious about the outcomes of my life, so I just spend a lot of time learning and trying to grow in my knowledge of how to make things better for myself. We go, how well adjusted. Like what an amazing thing you did. But at some point, the problem with drinking your anxieties away is that it doesn't work. You're just trying to escape reality for a while. And Ecclesiastes is saying here, trying to learn your anxieties away is basically the same thing. It's not bad to learn. It can really help. But it's a horrible coping mechanism for the reality of life. Because eventually, you will find reality shaking off the wood chips of all your wisdom and all your knowledge and all your techniques. Is a scholar, biblical scholar, Jeff Myers. He says, you shouldn't be surprised to find yourself in frustrating situations from which you can't escape by controlling them. Not everything can be fixed. Not everything is a problem to be solved. Some things must be borne, must be suffered and endured. Wisdom does not teach us how to master the world. It was never meant to give us techniques for programming life so that it becomes orderly and predictable. But that's exactly the promise it makes. The problem is it can't deliver. So, too long didn't read. Study all the right books. Read all the right blogs, read the right newspapers, the right articles, watch the right TED Talks, do all the right steps, learn all the right techniques, and if you're trying to get into the control tower, you will live an incredibly frustrated life for the rest of your life. You're just going to be catching bubbles that pop. So what do you do? Well, this is the last point, the provision of true wisdom. He has a landing point for this tour, and we're going to come back to it week after week. It's at the end of chapter 2. He starts in verse 24. I'll read it. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. What's he saying? This is the landing spot. What's he saying? He's saying, if your life is a project for gain, you will always be frustrated. And it will feel meaningless and vexing for you. But if your life is about enjoying God's gifts as a human being, you'll find joy. Or maybe put a little more simply, if you try and be more than human, you will end up as less. If you're content being human under God's love and authority, you will be very, very happy and have lots of joy in your life. Ecclesiastes, it's setting these two options before us, and it's making them out to be a very important choice you're going to make. You can look at, we're taking wisdom, you can look at wisdom as a gift from God, or you can look at it as part of your project for gain. And only the first one's going to give you any real joy. Because, see, what the author understands, and what we, having a whole Bible, understand, is that this goes further back than, like, the scientific revolution. Back in the temptation in the garden, Adam and Eve, what's the temptation? What does the temptation come in? It comes in as, you can be like God, knowing good and evil. The temptation is the promise of human wisdom. If you learn this, then you see you're in the control tower just like God. That's the kind of knowledge you're looking for. So it's not just facts, it's knowledge that makes you godlike, that puts you in the tower. And so there was this choice in the very beginning. You can grow in wisdom in dependence on God, learning and enjoying in His world, or you can look for something more. You can try and transcend the boundaries of your humanity. You can try and be godlike and outgrow your limitations and get into the tower. That's the real promise of human wisdom. It's a lie from someone who does not have your best intentions at heart. And that lie, now this is pretty important. We don't have a lot of time for it, but it's very important, I would say. There is a sense in which at this point a lot of Christians will say, absolutely. There's a lot of non-Christians out there that don't realize that they themselves, it's meaningless to try and get your own wisdom. What they need to do is become Christians. Well, kind of. This might be one of the more dangerous temptations for Christians. You want to know why? Because for us, I don't know, it's sort of baked into the culture. We kind of know you shouldn't be looking for satisfaction like worldly pleasure. And we kind of know you shouldn't be looking for satisfaction in worldly success. But how often have you been warned that your pursuit of knowledge might be satanic? Like, how often does that come across your desk? Because for a lot of people, from a variety of backgrounds, and because of a variety of circumstances in their life, they come to God, they come to church, they come to Christianity because they're on their project and they've exhausted all the other options. This didn't work, and that didn't work, and this didn't work, but maybe if I come to church, if I get to know the Bible, these are the things that can get me into the control tower of my life. Knowing this is what actually gets me to be able to shape my life, to know the outcomes, to be able to trust that what comes next is what I want to come next. And so you have these Christians who start assuming that, like, by virtue of their Christianity, they must be in the control tower. Like, they must have the important knowledge to get life to work the way that they want. I'm just going to put God's word into practice, and that's going to make my life turn out exactly according to my blueprint. But now, see, what are you doing? This is crazy to me. What you're doing, if you believe that the Bible is a means for you to become godlike, to get into the control tower of your life, you are using God's word for a satanic purpose. That's something. And we ought to be careful about that. Because, see, for God to be a part of your life, this is the issue. He needs to be God, and you need to be not God. That's how we are. It's frankly, there's very little more offensive than that today. You're not God. You can't be in control like that. And yet, one of the reasons why is because we believe that that's what's best for us. And if God really loved us, He would give us the control tower. That's what loving people would do. But God's smarter than us. And He loves us more than that. And He knows we're created to flourish in a certain role, in a certain way. Tim Keller had this illustration. I don't know when I heard it, but it stuck in my brain because it's pretty visual. He said, imagine if someone came into your office or your house and said, hey, I'm having a real hard time with my popcorn maker. The popcorn keeps coming out like really wet and like in these tiny pieces. It's like blowing apart. And you're like, well, let me go see this popcorn machine and see if I can help you fix it. And you turn the corner and you go, oh, well, I know why it's not working because this is an espresso machine. Like when you put popcorn in it, it's not going to work. Like you should get a popcorn maker for popcorn. You're using this for a thing it wasn't designed to do. And so you're just destroying everything and the machine. And in the same way, this is what Ecclesiastes is teaching us. Saying, look, trying to transcend your humanity, trying to be God-like, trying to have that kind of control, you're using your life, your existence, yourself for something it wasn't designed to do. You're wrecking everything, and you're wrecking yourself. Trying to be more than human, it leaves you less. And you lose all the joy. And so what he's saying is what we have to do is embrace our humanity. We have to embrace the limitations, not fight them. Not try and see how close we can get to control, because that's what God made us to be. But see, how do you get there? When it's baked in this deep, this project, how do you get there? We need to see the true wisdom of the gospel. God provides a kind of wisdom in the gospel that frees you and frees me to enjoy knowledge instead of leveraging it for our personal project. You can actually get joy out of learning instead of making it part of a project to be like God. You know, in 1 Corinthians 1, something that the preacher didn't know, but that we do, it talks about Jesus Christ. Paul says, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. You see, somehow in Jesus Christ, what you're finding is the very wisdom of God. Now, what wisdom is that? Well, it's not wisdom in, here are the principles that will allow you to climb the ladder up into the control tower, to get you the thing that you think you need. No, that's not the wisdom. The wisdom is not us climbing up to him to be God-like. It's him coming down to us. The Son of God coming down. This is the gospel movement. It's a downward movement. Philippians 2, it's a famous passage. Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not consider equality with God a thing to be grasped. Do you hear the echoes in that? That the very Son of God, who is equal with God, does not say, I want to transcend the limitations. I want to become God-like. No, he doesn't consider it something to be grabbed like we do. No, instead, he empties himself, takes the form of a servant, born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbles himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Being human is not a project of ascending into omniscience. And being Christian isn't the key that unlocks the door to the control tower you want to be in. Being human, being authentically human, being Christian, is about living as a human being and finding joy in what God provides for you. And the biggest gift, the biggest provision is Jesus Christ himself. Understand what happens when you believe that learning will get you into the control tower. When you want to get into the control tower, you're storming the gates of heaven. We have a hard time thinking about, have I really rebelled against God? Absolutely you have. Because by trying to say, I want to be in control, you've said, I see the seat you're in the tower. I'm going to come up and remove you from that seat and be in myself. That's called war. That's what war is, unseating one king and replacing them with another. And so while we might not feel very visceral about it, it's exactly what's happening. And how we feel about it is probably not the big arbiter of whether or not we actually are rebellious. This is what's going on. And so what you find then is Jesus Christ coming down, and instead of taking us to task for it and walking away, dying in our place, so that we could go from rebels to adopted children. So that the God who is in the control tower is no longer someone we fight for control, but someone we look to as Father, who is in control and who loves us this much. Now, do you see what that means? The gospel is a gift to you, not a part of your project. It's not ammunition that you get to conquer the universe. It's a gift meant to be enjoyed as a human being. And that gift allows you to enjoy all the other gifts. That's the thing that unlocks the door. Not being more than human, but being human in light of Jesus Christ. See, why? Why is the lie so tempting? Why do we think we need to be in that control tower? What's the promise of human wisdom? And why is it so alluring? Because at some level, we think that God just can't quite be trusted. Not with this much control. See, if you trust the person in the control tower in the airport, you don't try and get in there. It's only when you don't think they're going to do right by you that you try and get in. And that drives the project. You see, I have to learn everything so I can make sure I have some hedge against God's control in my life. I have at least one or two of the levers. You know, I have to make sure I have some say in how things go because I can't trust him to do right by me. This is what's in us. But yet, do you see what the gospel does? This is how God uses his control. The one in the control tower uses the knowledge, uses the power, uses the omniscience and the omnipotence to take the very Son of God and send him down to die for you and for me. Now, if that's what the one in the control tower does, how do we not trust him? It frees you to trust. It frees you to say, I'm happy to be what you created me to be. Under your authority, under your love. And so the gospel frees you to trust him, and that changes then how you learn. There's lots of ways we could talk about this, but basically every time you learn something, if you're tied into the gospel, if you've seen the provision of the true wisdom of God, you're able to learn it as a gift, not as part of your project. It frees you to be someone who doesn't have to learn everything, but who gets joy out of learning some things. And it makes Christians who don't have to go out there and parade and say, well, I'm a Christian, I have all the answers. No, we don't. Of course we don't. We have some of the answers, the most important ones, but nowhere near all of them. And why did we ever feel like we had to? No. What it frees you to do is to have a different posture towards the things that come into your life. Just when you look at your phone, all the information that comes. Are you on a project via that information to get into the control tower? Is that why you want to know everything that's going on? All the opinions, all the thoughts, all the research, all the different ideas? Or are you actually able to enjoy the things you're learning? The gospel frees you to be someone who has been given the amazing experience of being human under a God who has embraced you as Father. But we often live chained to this grand personal project of being more than human, getting control over the universe. What does it look like when this happens to you, when the gospel frees you this way? We don't have time to go into all of it, but here's a few just to have. You become someone who's very joyfully able to say, I don't know. I have no idea. I haven't heard that before. I have no opinion on that. These are things, I don't know how to have an opinion. These are things that we have such a hard time with that now. There's this sense that you're supposed to know everything about everything all the time. Did you hear the latest thing? What do you think about that? I don't know. We feel like we have to know because we're behind on our personal project to be in control over everything. But when Jesus is in control and you see the provision of his wisdom in the gospel, I have no idea. Tell me. I'm very excited. I want to know. Tell me what you learned. You're able to say, I don't know. When you read and think and dwell on things, there's at least some of you that feels excited, not behind. That feels like, this is pretty cool, I get to learn something. Not, oh my gosh, there's so much out there. I just feel, I got to read this other stuff, and I got to learn this, and I'm doing these techniques wrong, and someone else has a new life hack that I didn't try, and look what Steve Jobs did. Oh my gosh, I'm living my life wrong. There's none of this. It just comes down, okay. And maybe one more. When you're freed this way, you're no longer paralyzed by how much you don't know. You're excited to choose something to learn and enjoy. When you look to read about something, it's not, oh man, there's so much. You get so paralyzed. There's all this over here and all this over here. I don't know this over here. I don't know this over here, and I got to figure all this out. And everyone else knows everything, and that's what Twitter says. And I've got to do this and this and this, and you're able to go, no, I don't have to know everything. What do I want to learn? And you're able to get excited, not paralyzed, to move forward, not be sort of stymied at a stop. You become someone who looks at life as a human being and is actually able to enjoy it. You're no longer on the treadmill. It's no more wood chips. And to get there, you have to enlist the gospel, to walk with Jesus in such a way that regularly, sometimes moment by moment in your day, like minute by minute sometimes, you are undoing this project that you've set yourself on for a long time and reminding yourself how free you are to be away from being chained to the project and move towards enjoying whatever it is you're doing in the moment. When Jesus was on earth, he told people, he said, one greater than Solomon is here. A lot of people believe that Solomon wrote this book, and they have good reason to. Solomon essentially this book cannot give you the fullness of the meaning of what's being talked about. But Christ coming down from above the sun can. We don't work our way up through garnering enough wisdom to be like God. We're stuck under the sun, but that's where God made us to be. And Jesus comes to bring meaning to life under the sun again. Now, here's what that means. This is the last thing I'll say. We cannot overcome the world by learning enough to control the vapor. But Jesus comes in, you know what he says? He says, take heart, I have overcome the world. And because he has that provision of true wisdom, you and I can go enjoy all the amazing things there are out there to explore. Life is something else. But it's only something else when you see the provision of true wisdom in Jesus Christ. So you should go enjoy that, and so should I. Let's pray. Father, would you give us grace to enjoy it? There's so many ways we want to embark on the project and leverage every little thing in our path to make it happen. We're prone to wander, Lord, we feel it. but you are good, and we ask that you would take our hearts and seal them so that we would see you as the ultimate provision. We would see you as the ultimate prize, as the ultimate gain. That we'd be able to then enjoy the wisdom that you give us as humans, but you're humans under the sun. Give us eyes to see, Father, ears to hear, and a human life to enjoy. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you for listening to Cornerstone West Los Angeles. For more information, please visit us on the web at cornerstonewla.org.